Chairman, I rise to speak to the infrastructure bill in Part 4 in particular, which would repeal the Affordable Housing Enabling Territorial Authorities Act of 2008. And I want to back up a little bit, because this is one piece of legislation that had my name on it as Minister of Housing at the time. And I would like to ask the government to reconsider the inclusion of the repeal of this piece of legislation in this infrastructure bill. Mr. Chairman, the Affordable Housing Enabling Territorial Authorities Act of 2008 was enacted as a deliberate and constructive method of addressing a problem which had become endemic, and that was the lack of affordable housing across New Zealand. That lack of affordable housing had led to, along with other influencing factors, had led to an extraordinary surge in the price of houses between 2000 and 2007. Between those years, Mr. Chairman, we saw the average cost of houses in New Zealand increase by 80%. 80%. And this was part of the problem which has led to banks irresponsibly lending to people who would not normally have any way of repaying such loans, and the escalation of private debt in New Zealand. However, the banks continued to lend to people as land prices and house prices escalated during those 7 years. Mr. Chairman, the Labor government knew that something had to be done about this situation if ever we were going to have another generation of New Zealanders who could get their feet on the bottom rung of the housing ladder and so have the kind of security that all of us aspire to have for ourselves and our families, and that is the ownership of our own homes. That ownership of our own homes, Mr. Chairman, is something that is very fundamental to New Zealanders' view of ourselves. And it is very fundamental to the kind of lifestyle and quality of life that we generally wish to uphold and improve for ourselves. However, affordable housing was escalating out of the reach of first home buyers. And so this was one method, not the only one, but one method that the Labor government brought in order to alleviate this problem. The government we have now has done nothing to address the lack of affordable housing, nothing to address the inability of families on low and middle incomes to get the kind of independence and security that they can by owning their own house. This government is in fact working in the opposite direction, and the repeal of this legislation is part of that reverse direction. Mr. Chairman, when I was putting forward this bill, I went to a number of developers. I went to the big developers, those who are responsible for large residential housing developments and construction. And I said to them, what's wrong with this bill? What's wrong with this bill? Tell me what your objection to it is. And they said, we make more money out of building one McMansion than we do out of building 10 affordable houses. There is no economy of scale for us in building 10 affordable houses. We can make a fortune out of building 1 or 2 McMansions in Botany Downs rather than providing affordable housing in South Auckland. And I said to them, explain to me how that works. And they went through it. And they said, well, you do this much for plumbing and electrical wiring, you add these kinds of overheads in if you make it 2 stories. On they went and explained it to me. Mr. Chairman, about 8 months later, Mr Chairman,
Marion Street.
about 8 months later, when the bottom was falling out of the building and construction industry, those very same people were coming and knocking on my door and saying, "Minister, have we got a deal for you? We can do 10 affordable houses," because suddenly they saw the building and construction opportunities drying up before their eyes. And if anybody was able to provide some leverage to enhance building and construction, it was the government. Because building on Crown land was one of the few options that the building and construction industry had left and available to it. And this government calls this the infrastructure bill. They call it the infrastructure bill. If they were serious about infrastructure, if they were even halfway serious, Mr Chairman, about creating jobs, they would look at the leverage that the Crown has in all its Crown land holdings, and they would start to release that land, such as the land in Hobsonville, for the building of affordable houses. Not only does the government then create jobs, stimulate apprenticeships because apprentices then have somewhere to go, but it provides through that mechanism the means for new families, young families on low and middle incomes to get into the housing market. This government continues to pull the ladder up behind it. There are people sitting in that government over there, Mr Chairman, who have benefited in the past from government assistance into housing, and now they continue to pull the ladder up. And please forgive me if I'm raising my voice, Mr Chairman, but this really riles me. There is nothing more fundamental in this country than the right to shelter and the ability to have and own one's own home has forever been part of the Kiwi dream. This infrastructure bill might as well be called the destruction of the Kiwi dream bill. This is a nonsense. If this government goes around the country one more time saying, "Look what we're doing in infrastructure," then I want every other New Zealander to say, "How does that work in housing again?" Mr Joyce thinks he's improving infrastructure by rolling out roads. I would suggest he could do better by improving public transport. But what is happening in the building of houses, even this very small measure, this optional measure, this provision that local and territorial authorities were not obliged to take up, but could benefit from taking up, is being taken away. Not only has this government on the 1st of July axed the shared equity program, not only has it axed the shared equity program, which was a way of assisting low and middle income earners into their first home by the government assisting and providing some capital investment which over time a family could buy the government out of. Not only have they axed that scheme, but now they want to take away even a provision that was optional, that local authorities could use to good advantage in order to encourage residential housing developments in their areas. And they could do that through the provisions of this affordable housing legislation. But no, far from encouraging infrastructure, Mr Chairman, this is depleting infrastructure. It is denying jobs. It is denying skills training. It is denying the opportunity for people to be able to buy their own house, their first house, and to get onto that bottom rung of the home ownership ladder, which allows people to improve their prospects, to lever themselves out of minimal wages and improve their own standard of living. This is an injurious provision to put into